In this chapter, we're going to be working with the 3D cursor and object origins. This is actually a pretty important chapter, and it's going to show you a few key things about transforming and editing objects that will make your life a lot easier. We've already learned some things about it before, but this chapter is just going to be a refresher for those things, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how useful this stuff can be. Chapter is about understanding the 3D cursor and object origins, which is something that stumps a lot of new users, but is actually not that complicated. You might need to refer back to this chapter on occasion until you get a total grasp on things. First, some basic explanations. Whenever you add an object, there's a dot at its center, this orange dot right there. That is called its origin, and it's also referred to as a pivot point, which is it's because when you rotate the object, it will rotate around that point. And will also scale around that point. So it's called the origin, but also referred to as a pivot point. And the origin is only really relevant in object mode. When you go into edit mode, it's a whole different way of editing, and it doesn't really take into account where the origin is. Now, the 3D cursor you see here, which we've already used a little bit, is basically a reference point in space, and you can move it simply by left-clicking. Whenever you add an object, it's going to place it at the position of the 3D cursor. So notice when I add another cube, it's going to place it there. Let me delete that. Now you can also transform objects based on the position of the 3D cursor instead of using the object origin. Now let me show you how to do that. If we go into the header of the 3D view, there's a pivot point menu right here, and if you click on that, you have a whole list of pivot points you can choose from. Now the default is median point, which if you just have one object selected, it's going to rotate around the origin, and if you have multiple objects selected, it's going to rotate around the center of those two origins. But let's change that to 3D cursor. And now if you press the R key, you'll see it rotates around the 3D cursor instead of the origin point. And it's also going to scale based on the 3D cursor position. So that's how you can change the pivot point to work with the 3D cursor instead of the origin. And that comes in handy for a lot of different things. And there's also some other pivot point types I'm going to show you real quick. Let me duplicate this cube a couple of times. I'm going to hold Shift and right click on them all to select them. And let's change the pivot point from 3D cursor to individual origins. Now, when you change it to that and you press the R key, you'll see all of the cubes are rotating individually based on their own origin point, instead of rotating as a group. And if we change that to active element, all of the objects we select will rotate around the last object we selected, the active selection. Now you can tell that the top right cube is the active selection because it's highlighted a lighter orange than the rest. All these darker orange highlights denote that these cubes are inactive selections. And you can change the active selection by holding Shift and selecting one of the other cubes. And you can see their highlight their highlight color changes. So now the bottom left cube is the active selection. And if I press R to rotate them, it's going to rotate around that cube. I'm going to change it back to median point, which is default. Now I'm going to run through the couple different menus that there are that give us options to play with the object origin and 3D cursor. Now we've gone through these before, but I'm just going to go through them now in a little bit more detail. If you press the Shift and S hotkey, you'll have a snap menu, which gives us options to position the cursor. We can position the cursor to the selected object with this option, or cursor to center, which if we click on that, it returns the cursor to 0.000 in space, basically centering it in the Blender world. And press Shift and S to get back into that menu. We can snap the cursor to the grid, so whatever grid point the cursor is closest to, it will snap to it. If we place it in a random spot there, press Shift and S and select cursor to grid, you'll see that it moved to the closest grid point. Press Shift and S again, and we can also move the cursor to the position of the active selection. Alright, now the next menu, if you press the T key for the side toolbar, is the origin menu, which we've played with before. If you left click on that, you'll have some options to move the origin point and also to move the geometry. So let's select this cube on the top left here. Select the origin menu, and let's just move origin to the 3D cursor. So now the orange dot moved to the position of the 3D cursor. Now when we rotate the cube, it's going to rotate around its new origin point position. Now let's say I want to center the cube back to where the origin is. Select the origin menu again, and let's select, we can either move the geometry to the origin, like that. It moves the cube mesh over to where the position of the origin point is. Let me press Ctrl and Z to undo that. Or we can move the origin point back to the center of the cube. We can do that by selecting origin and choosing origin to geometry. It moves the origin point back to the center of the geometry. That's basically all there is to those two menus. And the more you start working with Blender and modeling your own scenes, you'll figure out the different uses for all of these things. So now that we got all of that stuff out of the way, let's put some of it to the test. Let's make a door open. If you press F1 and navigate to the Blends folder, open up the blend file, door, start. Let me just real quick enable screencast keys so you can see what keys I'm pressing. Alright, so here I created a little bit of a scene. We have a door frame, and a floor. If you select the door, you'll notice the origin point is in the center of the door. So when you go to press the R key to rotate it, it's of course going to rotate around that point. What we want to do is move that point to the left side of the door so that it will open and close on a hinge, just like a door should. To do that, let's go into Top View and press numpad 5 for top orthographic view. In wireframe view, let's zoom in, and we have a bit of a situation here. The scene's kind of cluttered. So I'm going to select the floor, press H to hide that, select the door frame and press H to hide that, and here we are left with our door. So first thing we need to do is decide which way the door is going to open. We can place the hinge on this side if it opens this way, or the hinge on this side so it opens this way. I'm going to place it at the bottom so it opens this way. With the door selected, press the Tab key to go into edit mode. Press the A key to make sure nothing's selected, and then the B key for border select, and let's select these vertices right here. With them selected, press Shift and S for the snap menu and choose cursor to selected. So that moved the 3D cursor right where our selected vertices are. If you rotate the view, you'll see it's centered right along those edges. Now if we press Tab to go back into object mode, now the goal is to move the origin point over to where the 3D cursor is. So let's press the T key for the left side toolbar, choose the origin option, and select origin to 3D cursor. And boom, you'll see it just moved the origin point over to where the 3D cursor is. So press T to get rid of that toolbar, and now press R and Z, and you'll see it open and close on the left side of the door, right where the hinge is. So that was pretty easy, but we're going to go a little bit further now and actually restrict the rotation of the door. Because right now if you press the R key, you'll see it rotates on every axis. We want to restrict that so it can only rotate on the Z axis, so it opens and closes just like a door should. And to do that is pretty simple. You can press the N key or the plus sign on the right side of the 3D view for the right side toolbar. And at the top of this toolbar are some transform options. Here you'll see the location of your door, the rotation of it, and the scale of it. There's also all these lock icons next to these fields. If we enable these, it will restrict whatever field that is. So under the rotation options, let's lock the x-axis by clicking on the lock icon next to it, and let's also lock the y-axis. So now the door will not be able to rotate on the x or y-axis. It will only be able to rotate on the free axis, which is the z. So now when you press the R key in the 3D view, you'll see it's restricted to the z-axis. So that's just something cool you can do with the toolbar on the right side. So you can press the N key to get rid of that, and we're left with our door. We're going to press Alt and H to unhide everything. And let's see how our door looks opening and closing in the scene. So that's all there is to it. And that's all there is to this chapter.